Now to our big story, where Nigeria's military has confirmed what had circulated quietly for weeks, a foiled coup plot involving serving and retired officers. Arrests have been made, investigations are ongoing, and those indicated are expected or indicted are expected to face military trial. This development raises serious questions about discipline within the ranks and the strength of our democratic institutions. Now, the defense headquarters say the plot was uncovered early, preventing any disruption to the national security. But the confirmation itself has reopened old anxieties in the country with a long history of military intervention in politics.
So to help us understand what this means for national stability, civil-military relations, and also public trust, we're joined by Dr. Dennis Amachree, former Deputy Director of the Department of State Services. Thank you very much for joining us, sir. And also we're joined by Augustine Egar. He's a security and cyber expert. Augustine, you're welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. Gentlemen, let me start with the doctor. Doctor, I'm wondering, let's talk about the civil-military relationship here. With the coup being confirmed now by the authorities, something that was, denied from before, what does this say about the relationship between the civil-military relationship?
Well, civil-military relationship has remained very tacky with the intervention of the military into governance, starting from, I think, in the 60s. In the 60s, where after the most countries got their independence, I think most of them fell to military rule. In fact, at the time, the whole of West Africa was ruled by military governments, right? Like 1975, I think most governments were military. But again, they came in because of different kinds of, reasons. Some come in because they feel that the civilians were not doing very well, and they have to take over the government. But of course, military rule, when you plan these coups and you fail, then you are in for death. And if you win, then of course you win the government.
Dr. Amachree, that this was even a thought by members inside of the military. I'm wondering what that in itself says about the institution of the military itself. I don't know if this was an ideological thing, or if it was maybe something based on personal, well, it's beginning to point so, something simply based on personal disenfranchisement. So I'm wondering what you think on this ground here. Do we have a weakened military institution in that case?
The reason for intervention is different, has been different. In the early days, in fact, when we have the first wave of coups in West Africa, the reason for intervention was different, where either, misbehavior of politicians, East-West, the Cold War, the Cold War, most of the coups were even sponsored by Western powers. Western powers. So either you are in for Russia or China or France, or you are for United States, and that happened. But the recent ones, which is in the 1920s, 2020s, is a different one altogether, because here, most of them were coming in for personal reasons. Some of them were basically feeling that, the civilians are not doing very well, or there is an elongation of, should I say, the tenure of the civilian government and stuff like that. So the reasons are different from that first wave to this second wave.
I'd like to go to Augustine. Augustine, I did a bit of research, and it kind of shocked me to find out that since 2010 alone, there have been over 68 coups in Africa. Of course, some have been successful and some have not. Now, my question to you is, what drives the need for, retired and currently, serving military personnel to want to use this tactic or technique to try and restructure democracy and the country?
Well, thank you. From what my senior colleague have just analyzed, I think we are not far from. He has laid a very good foundation and a background for us to carry through. It could be like I will just go through the one I met from the 80s, even from the past president that just passed on, Buhari and all that. They've always been a reason, and their reason will be hinged on economic hardship. They will give several reasons. You see several reasons that try to convince the public that this coup was worth it. They will talk about the rascality of politicians, the corruption of politicians, the hardship in the country, and these have always driven this coup plotting to remove governments and then try to form one, which in the end they don't always succeed. Also in Africa, like my colleagues say, they've always been a foreign undertone, beating the drum somewhere for them to do it. And but the recent ones, like the one I will see in Nigeria that's happened, I would treat that they have been very disciplined and very committed to democracy. I will say this because the one we've had before, the reasons for those coups, the go on and all of that, was not sufficient reason. That what we experience today is not even up to what they experienced that time, and they were coups. And so for now, they have maintained their discipline from that time till now. And you believe that in our own country, in Nigeria, there have been a lot of trouble that we could say, okay, it's justifiable. But I think they are not supposed to. And with this, I think the reason for it, they see some kind of from the reasons I saw from the indices I really watched out for, they're not aggrieved to a very great extent by the numbers of the that wish to use coming from an interest group, an interest, a geo-interest in a particular place. That is, this one now has to be with an individual thing. Whether they are going there
go ahead and tell us,
to make some reforms,
some
constitutional reform.
You can be specific, Augustine. Would like to know your
Can
opinion.
you hear me?
Yes. Be specific. You were pointing to an individual interest from a specific part of the country, and I'm asking you to go ahead and tell. It's an opinion.
Yes, it's my opinion. I'm sharing my opinion because from the number of the officers that are alleged, from now, before they said there was nothing, but now from the numbers that have been alleged, we can see the higher number coming from the north. It's an indication that there have been, the beating of the drum have come from somewhere around that area because they felt disfavored. And these are always the ground for military coups. I will also talk about the one they had in Egypt. Egypt had a very serious issue too. And the current president was able to maneuver that, military setting, and then took over, and there was a constitutional reform, and he's now the current democratic president of that nation. But in our case, we've not always had it like that. It always play around to be a particular interest. And in the end, we don't see Nigeria coming up with a new constitution, something that's going to help Nigeria stand. That is my point.
Okay. Very interesting, but I'm going to put one on top of that. Now, you say that this is coming from the north, and I'm wondering, Dr. Amachree, do you think that this also has anything to do with ideological contagion? And I'm saying this because of the number of coups that we've seen in the West African region and the proximity with these influences, like Augustine has just said, with the Sahel belt. Dr. Amachree, any thoughts on that?
Oh, yes. He's very, very correct. When you look at the Sahelian area, what is happening in those areas are different because they are either fighting for economic or elongation of governance, devoid of ethnicity or religion. But in Nigeria, we have had a history of coups that are, skewed towards either religion or ethnicity. If you remember very well, the very first coup we had, they said it was an Igbo coup. because the guy who led it was an Igbo. But of course, there are other elements from Yoruba and, even in the north that were part of it. But it was an Igbo coup, and the counter coup that came after that, was like a revenge, or should we say a correction, for that Igbo coup. So, and then of course we have series of, palace coups, which were the military themselves toppling each other. And funny enough, all those series of palace coups were Northerners doing it to themselves, And of course, when you look at all that, you can see the coloration, and of course, with this particular one, many people looked at it and said, "Oh, these are Northern guys. What is going on? Is it somebody? Because remember something: all coups are being sponsored by civilians. And it will be nice if." the investigation will lead us towards there, where we will now find out who were the sponsors of this particular one.
Dr. Amachree, I'm curious to know, we measure the success of coups as the military actually succeeding in taking over and gaining the power. But my question is, when we're talking about success, how many countries, because again, like I said, since 2010, we've got 68 coup attempts and those that actually fell through. How do we look at countries, or I guess in your view, outside of everyone praising Captain Ibrahim Traoré and some of the Sahel juntas, what country, is there a country in Africa right now that, of course, went through a coup and is actually doing well?
Traoré is doing very well, but I looked at between 2024 or 2021 to 2000 and present day, and we'll find out that within this period we've had 7 successful coups and 5 attempted. 5 attempted. That's the ones that failed. For the ones that are successful, like the one in Burkina Faso, even the one in Mali and Niger. These 3 countries have formed the AES, the Sahelian state, countries, and I think they have a popular support behind them. That's why when ECOWAS tried to, sanction them, they didn't feel much about it because they feel that their country was behind them, and that's another thing about coups. If there is no popular support, it usually fails. But if there are popular support, you find out that people will even come out on the streets to dance and protest and singing, So that's the barometer with which you want to maybe check to see whether they are popular or not popular.
Augustine, let me come to you. Now, you've just heard Dr. Amachree tell 7 successful coups, 5 attempted ones. Recently, we saw the one from Benin Republic, and then there was Guinea-Bissau, and now Nigeria. These are all West African states. It's not like as if they're outside all by themselves. They're all bound by one union, and that's ECOWAS. And I'm wondering where ECOWAS' responsibility lies here when it comes to strengthening institutional faith in democracy, the faith of institutions like the military in democracy. What do you think the responsibility of ECOWAS is, Augustine?
I will. When I listen to the founders of ECOWAS, that is former President Gowon, he said that it was mainly founded for economic purpose, to strengthen the economic ties of these West African nations. And I think he frowned at the issue of the breakup of these Sahel nations. We talk of Burkina, Mali, and Niger. And also the sanctions that came after the coup plotting. General Gowon was not happy about it, because if we have to ask anything about ECOWAS, hear from, they are the fathers that founded it. Meanwhile, I I think even when you look at the AU, there's a lot of complaint. There's a global, let's say African-wise, they are also complaining that the AU is not doing enough to protect the interests of Africa. So if that is so, we also had the reasons that these Sahel nations gave concerning ECOWAS. And they see it as a one-sided game. They see that ECOWAS is being manipulated by the foreign bodies, the foreign players. So they don't trust it in ECOWAS. That's why you see, I just read 2 days yesterday, Ibrahim Toure has even abolished all the political parties. Mm-hmm. He said that is a way of the foreigners penetrating their system. So ECOWAS, as it stands now, I think they need to look inward. I think after that, they have tried to have a series of means to see how they can strengthen the internal system. They are not really looking after this, the real interest of the African nations or the West, the bodies that make up ECOWAS. And this is why this breakup was very easy. And so I think the reason they should look inward, have meetings, and then continue to deepen their ties. They should always follow up what really makes them to stand, what makes them stand strong as ECOWAS from the founding days to today. If those things are not checked, we're going to see more breakups. We'll still see more breakups.
Augustine, it was obvious what the authorities were trying to do when they kept this information away from the public. It would have seemed that they were trying to safeguard the public from panic. But then again, the public also deserves transparency when it comes to these processes. In fact, transparency is what builds trust between the public and the authorities. Mm-hmm. Now, what should we be looking forward to with this military trials, with the arrests and the names that have been called? Now, remember now, I'm asking based on that transparency concept.
Is that for me?
No, it's for Augustine.
I think, okay, I will react to this that even in the past, I remember those days, if you were in the 80s when we have a war against discipline by the popular government that have just passed, some of these things are done for deterrent. Insecurity, we call it a deterrent strategy, whereby if something happened like this, there should be a very strong punitive measure. This is to send a message to others that are willing or are still trying to do similar things that this is not acceptable. It is not a conduct that we accept. So I think the Nigerian military, I think they have resolved like to support democracy. And so by naming and shaming these people who took part in this coup, and like my senior colleague said, they should not only, the military guys cannot really succeed. They cannot succeed in any coup without the civilian sponsorship. The finance is come from the civilians. So just like they are tracing all the fundings of Coup and all of that, they should also trace the funding of this military coup, this very one that took place. So with this, we will know that this conduct is not acceptable. That is, at least that's the way that they can support democracy to grow in Nigeria. So the civilians should also be tracked. Those with those financial powers, they should track them, bring them to book, just like they're also treating the military. They are all culprits. They are all together in this.
Dr. Amachree, I think you were interested in answering that question. Why did you go ahead?
Well, I think he has answered it, actually. You know, because, you know, what happens with coups, like I told you, the consequences, you know, are the deterrent factors that we have. If you fail, you know you are going to die, you know, and of course in Nigeria, it has happened without any kind of intervention. I remember some coups in Nigeria where, you know, the coup plotters were caught, who attempted it, and then a lot of civilians came to beg. In fact, recently, there was one. I think in the last government or so, or last two governments, where they were begging, and the death sentence was commuted to life imprisonment. Okay, so if you win, then you win the trophy, which is the government. But if you lose, then you have to die. So these are the consequences that come with, you know, the coup plotting.
With that, it becomes quite clear that democracy is not only protected at the ballot box, but it is protected by strong institutions and a constant vigilance. This moment calls for accountability, not panic, and reforms that reinforce trust. And of course, we will keep tracking this story. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time and your input on this matter.